DTC is hot, B2B is not. I think we can all agree on that. But my guest today thinks otherwise, and I'm curious to know why. Welcome to a new episode of the No Hack Show, a weekly podcast where we discuss many different ways you can optimize your online presence. I'm Kath, and today we're going to talk about why DTC needs B2B commerce and why it's currently the dark horse of the e commerce world. Joining me to share his thoughts on B2B e-commerce is Jason Greenwood, the founder of Greenwood Consulting. Jason has consulted on and architected solutions across many complex B2B, DTC, and B2C environments over the last 20 plus years. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me along for the ride today, Catherine.
Great. And we had a little chat before we started. You recently moved to Mexico. So I need to ask, like, I'm pretty sure you've went around and eaten on all the taquerias over there. Tell me, which is the best? Is it chilaquiles, beef birria, or the traditional street tacos?
Look, I love almost all Mexican food, but I still absolutely love street tacos. It's hard to beat a good street taco for 20 pesos. I usually have 3 or 4 of them. And, for less than $2 a taco to have, basically family made tacos, because all of these taco stands are owned by families, and yeah, they've all got their own recipes, and it tends to be really amazing. I usually go for beef barbacoa tacos and absolutely love them.
So is it very different from the tacos that you have like in the States or in other countries that you've
Yeah, I
been?
think what most people don't understand is that the crispy taco shell is not a native Mexican thing. So most Americans know tacos being, maybe what they get at Taco Bell, or maybe
Taco
what
Bell,
they get
yeah.
there, or maybe what they get at their local Mexican place with the hard, crispy taco shell. It's not like that in Mexico. That is not a native. In fact, I haven't yet found a place in Mexico that does the crispy taco shells.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
the traditional taco is a soft corn tortilla taco
Mhm.
shell. So
And is
soft
it
soft
usually the
tacos.
tiny ones, tiny
Yeah, they're
tortillas?
very small. They're very small. They sort of fit in the palm of your hand, so you can easily eat 3 to 6 of those at a sitting.
That's amazing. I'll add that to my bucket list. I love Mexican food, and we have a lot of Mexican food here in Manila. But of course, I'm
Yes.
not sure if that's the most authentic one. So
Yeah.
great. Well, you just moved to Mexico. Maybe we can get started by you telling us a little about Greenwood Consulting. Like, how did you land in Mexico? Did you go there for work, or where did it all start?
Yeah, look, Greenwood Consulting really sprang out of a desire to have more personal freedom in my life. And look, I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and, I had my own e-commerce pure play. I've worked for some of the largest e-commerce merchants in the ANZ region. I've helped to run digital agencies, e-commerce agencies, and absolutely love the space, love the industry, feel very lucky that I ended up in a space where we can work remotely, and we can deal digitally with our clients and help brands level up their game from anywhere in the world. As long as I got my laptop and the internet, I can do what I do. And COVID really proved that out. And I think that a lot of potential clients that maybe pre-COVID would have expected to maybe meet you at least one time in person before they sort of shook your hand and eyeballed you up and down and had a conversation and develop that connection and then sign on the dotted line. Even that lingering expectation went away during COVID, and when everybody was kind of forced to work remotely. And so now, my clients that I work with had, oftentimes will have zero expectation, because I work with clients all around the world. They would have zero expectations they would ever meet me in person, but they oftentimes, by the time they meet me, they know kind of who I am, what I'm about, what my experience is. They've met me virtually through my content, and maybe through people that know me, and maybe through other brands that have worked with me, and or maybe through an agency referral. And so the reality is that this is a very, very good time to be working in digital. And I made a very intentional move to go independent and start my own private independent consultancy after coming out of running an agency. And one of the main goals behind that was to be able to be on the move, to be able to be a digital nomad, to be able to move internationally, to be able to live and travel and experience. My wife and I, we both love traveling. We both love meeting new cultures, experiencing new cultures. My wife is Asian. I'm obviously not. And, so I've had and have friends all around the world with different cultures, different backgrounds. And that's what fills my cup. That's what makes me feel connected to people all around the globe, is to actually meet them and experience the world through their lens. And it helps me to build empathy, and it helps me to build a respect and appreciation for their culture. And so, during COVID, we didn't travel for over 3 years during COVID. New Zealand, many of your listeners may not know, but New Zealand was one of the most locked down countries in the world.
Yeah.
And, when we were locked down, it was difficult to leave the country. It was almost impossible to get back into the country. So we just didn't travel for like 3.5 years. And so for two people that love travel and to love experiencing things around the world, that was really difficult for us. And but it allowed us to focus on work. It allowed us to save a bit of money, and it allowed me to build my business whilst I was still in New Zealand in those early days, because we've been up and running just over 2.5 years now as a consultancy. And yeah, we decided to make the move to Mexico, be closer to, be part of back in North America again, and be able to access conferences in North America, be able to access events, and be able to access clients more easily in North America. And, we love Mexico. I personally, I grew up in Southern California. So I had been to Mexico multiple times when I was younger. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, Riverside, about 40 minutes east of LA. And so I always had a soft spot in my heart for Mexico anyway. And Mexico just happens to also have very friendly immigration policy for digital nomads and people seeking temporary residency that then you can roll into permanent residency. So we wanted to try Mexico out, and we brought our dog with us. We don't have kids, so our dog is our fur child, and we brought our dog with us, and we're going to travel for about a year before we decide where to settle down. We've got a bucket list of 10, 15 places that look like potential places to settle down. And so we're traveling and experiencing those about a month in each place. And then once we find a place that feels like home, we'll settle down. So that's how we got here.
That's awesome. I mean, I know of the strict lockdowns. I think here in Asia Pacific region, it's really Australia and New Zealand that had the strictest lockdown. And that's what they call everyone now is in revenge travel mode.
Yeah, definitely catch up travel mode. That's for sure.
Great. I'm going to ask you more about the mentorship that you're offering later in the podcast, because I think that's also very inspiring that you're doing that and you're helping out other people. So can you just clarify? So right now you're servicing B2B, or are you servicing e-commerce in general and e-commerce tech?
Yeah, so I've got a special focus on B2B. I've worked for many years across both D2C and B2C. But what I found when I started my consultancy work is that there is not a ton of B2B specialists in the market. So whilst I have D2C clients as well, most of those clients either, they're D2C, depends on how you define D2C, but I define D2C as manufacturers, wholesalers, or distributors selling directly to end consumers, right?
Right.
And that's differentiated from B2C in that B2C is simply a retailer selling somebody else's stuff. They're not a manufacturer, they're not a wholesaler, they're not a distributor, they're a reseller, they're a retailer, and they're selling other people's brands, maybe as a retail aggregator. So D2C and B2C they have some underlying things in common in that B2B and D2C both are manufacturers, wholesalers, or distributors, right? It's just who your customer is that is different. And the volumes that you sell tend to be different in the B2B versus D2C world. D2C tends to be one-off items, and in B2B, you tend to be selling in bulk to other, B2B customers. So for me, it was a natural evolution when I saw this massive gap in the market. Instead of trying to go into the red ocean space of focusing on D2C, B2C, which there's lots and lots of consultants out there that specialize in D2C, B2C, lots of competition in the space. And so I thought, well, look, I have this deep experience in B2B commerce and helping brands develop their B2B commerce strategy, their people, their process, their tech, their data, getting all that ready to go to market in the B2B space. I thought, why don't I turn that into a specialization, right? And it's very blue ocean, just not a tremendous amount of competition in the space. And so it's worked very, very well. I help B2B brands both establish B2B e-commerce as well as a direct-to-consumer channel if they want to develop that. And on the flip side, I help a lot of D2C brands implement and level up their D2C game and or develop a B2B channel alongside their existing D2C channel. And I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of cross-pollination between B2B and D2C today. And it's been a really, really fun ride. And I really love the clients that I get to work with every day. And it keeps me sharp. It keeps the sword sharp, and it keeps my finger on the pulse of the industry. And I think that I cross-pollinate the experience I have through creating content and meeting with experts from all across the industry and sharing their stories and contributing to their stories, hopefully, and getting them exposed into the broader world of e-commerce. But, and I bring a lot of those experiences into my consulting work, but vice versa. My consulting work keeps me up to speed with everything that's happening in the industry and makes me continue to learn and level up my game so that I can continue to add value for my clients. But I take those learnings and I try to transfer those learnings into the content that I create as well. So it's hopefully a bit of a virtuous cycle.
Right. And there's a lot to unpack there. First, let's go specifically to D2C brands. So example, I'm a skincare brand and I'm selling directly to consumers. So first, I want to ask, why do you think DTC brands are usually the one that gets the most attention? They're in media, they get a lot of funding versus the B2B commerce space?
Yeah, look, I think that was a holdover or a hangover from excess liquidity in the market due to zero interest rate policies since 2008 by central banks all around the world. The world was awash with liquidity for over a decade. And, VCs and investors and private equity, they were all looking for yield. And when, with zero interest rates, you can't just put your money in the bank because it'll just get eaten up by inflation. And so all VCs were looking for yield. And during that boom, particularly during COVID, when the TAM or total addressable market for e-commerce sales exploded, it quadrupled overnight, and everybody was locked at home shopping online. When Granny even starts shopping online, that the TAM has exploded. When Granny is getting her grandkids to help her shop online so that she doesn't have to go to the supermarket and potentially get COVID, the world has changed. But what we now know, and what I kind of assumed all along, was that this was not a permanent shift, right? And so when the TAM exploded, it looked like all these direct-to-consumer brands were going to all succeed. They were all going to be hugely successful and sustainable, and that this was a secular shift from physical to virtual shopping and commerce. Now what we know is that the trend is still up and to the right, but the trend is returning much more to the mean of the pre-COVID rise in penetration of e-commerce as a percentage of retail. And so I think that what happened was a lot of brands that were not particularly well run, that didn't particularly have a defensible moat, that weren't sustainable in the sense that they, 90% of their traffic was coming from performance marketing and very expensive CAC. When it's kind of like when the emperor has no clothes. When the tide goes out, we all see who's standing there naked. And a lot of these D2C brands just simply were never, ever engineered in a sustainable way. They were fueled by cheap capital and very expensive customer acquisition. And when the TAM shrunk overnight, when the world started to reopen again, all of a sudden these unsustainable businesses went down the tubes along with COVID. And so, we're seeing even huge global brands today like Allbirds and 8 Sleep and Casper and so many of these famous D2C brands really, really struggling with creating a sustainable business model whilst remaining a pure play direct consumer brand, because it's very difficult for these brands to get in front of every single customer in every single channel in every single market. And I think that's what's led us to where we are today, to where a lot of these D2C brands are now searching for a savior channel. When D2C isn't working or isn't sustainable for them, they're thinking, how can we get in front of more consumers and more channels and more markets without having to do all that legwork ourselves? And that's where B2B starts to come into action and come into play. And then all of a sudden, B2B becomes a lot more sexy when you're having those discussions.
Right. I heard this in one of your episodes. You mentioned that a particular report says B2B commerce is projected to grow 6 times versus DTC brands over the next 10 years. I think that's very telling. And then another thing that you mentioned is that being able to, to be available in the B2B commerce space will also de-risk your business. We don't, if there's going to be a next pandemic or whatever happens. And I want to drill down more on B2B commerce. Can we define that?
Absolutely. So I define B2B e-commerce as a manufacturer, a wholesaler, or a distributor selling to a business customer. So not selling to an end consumer, but selling to a business customer. Now that business customer might consume that product internally, or they might on-sell that product to the end consumer. So if we think of, let's say you're a manufacturer of office chairs, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might be selling it to a B2B business. You might be selling to another business that is going to use that office chair in their office, right?
Right.
In their office building. Or you might be selling to a reseller, meaning that you might be selling to a stationary or an office supplies chain. So you're selling to a business, but then they're on-selling that office chair to an end consumer who's then using it in their home office, for example. And so that's really what B2B is. B2B is a manufacturer, wholesaler, distributor that's selling to a business, and that business may consume that product internally, or they may on-sell that to an end consumer.
Right, right. And the reason why this can make the business more sustainable is because this is an additional income source. And would you say that this is usually more revenue generating, or it doesn't really equate to that?
Yeah, I mean the AOV and the LTV, so the average order value and the lifetime value of a customer in the B2B world is significantly different. The entire structure of a business is different in the B2B world, and you tend to have bulk orders in the B2B world are the norm. So instead of having maybe 5 items max in your basket in the D2C world, you have hundreds of items potentially in your
MOQs,
basket
yeah.
in the B2B world, not just because of MOQs, but because B2B buyers tend to be buying lots of an individual item plus lots of items in the same order. And then, the B2B supplier tends to be shipping in cartons, pallets, and containers versus individual items. And so it tends to be each individual customer that you secure in the B2B world tends to be much more valuable, and you tend to have much longer term relationships with those customers than you do in the D2C world, where customer stickiness and customer loyalty in the D2C world is very, very hard to secure. And the end consumer has so many options out there of where they can shop, and they have a massive variety of channels that they can shop through. Whereas in the B2B world, there tends to be fewer suppliers of those goods, and they tend to have oftentimes monopolies in their market or in their channel because maybe they've got an exclusive distributorship deal, for example, or if they're the manufacturer, then if somebody wants to buy those goods, they have to buy them through you because you are the manufacturer. You are the only source for those goods. And so B2B tends to be much more sticky. It tends to be much more valuable as a channel over time. The downside, if there is one, is that you tend to have lower margins in the B2B space than you do in the DTC space. But the DTC space's higher margins are offset by extremely high customer acquisition costs. And so that's there. Both channels are a bit of a double-edged sword, but I think the two of those working in tandem can really de-risk both go-to-market. I mean, we're talking really go-to-market strategy here. Both channels can de-risk your go-to-market strategy. And B2B in particular, what it does is it allows you to get in front of customers that you would normally never have access to, because those brands, they've got access to customers that they've built up over time, and they have routes to market that you potentially will never be able to access. So that is one of the big benefits of B2B.
And this reminded me, I met like an old friend they manufacture baby shampoos because I have kids, and I used to purchase from her. And I noticed like hey, what's going on? Aren't you selling anymore? I don't see your ads on Facebook and Instagram. And she goes, no, we're just focusing more on selling to resellers. That way, their orders are 30 cartons per month than the one like 5-20 pieces that they get on a weekly or monthly basis. And that way, she says, the ROI is faster just because their inventory goes out much faster. And I think that's like a great illustration of why branching out to B2B commerce is beneficial. Now, you also mentioned that B2B commerce or retailers or resellers can also benefit from branching out to offering DTC. How does that work? Like, if example, I'm that stationary store selling office supplies, office furnitures, like how would I benefit from offering a DTC channel?
I think the biggest advantage of a D2C channel is owning the end customer's data and having access to the end customer's data. So in the B2B world, oftentimes you don't know who the end consumer of your product is. You don't have their information. You can't remarket to them. You can't use the feedback from them for new product development. There's just nothing you can do. You can't create lookalike audiences from those that customer data. You can't go out and try to find more customers like them. You can't have conversations with those customers because you don't have direct contact with those customers in most cases. And so the reality is, unless there are some exceptions like warranty registration and things like that end customer data will come back to a manufacturer, but that's the exception, not the rule. And so I think the benefit of having a D2C play is that you can capture the wholesale and the retail margin. So generally the margins are better in D2C, not always, but generally speaking, the margins are better in a D2C play. You have much more customer data. You're creating a feedback loop with those customers, and you're building a direct relationship with those customers. And you're cutting out the middleman, and you are able to represent your full range in market, and you are able to sell at full price and defend your brand in market. And many customers will want to buy directly from a manufacturer. Given the opportunity, they would prefer to buy directly from the manufacturer than they would from a retail aggregator because of fears, for example, maybe that it's a counterfeit good, or there's myriad reasons. There's a lot more trust from a consumer when they're buying directly from the manufacturer. That is often the case, unless they're buying off of a retailer that they trust, right? And so I think that there is massive advantage there. And I give the example. I was working with an exclusively B2B brand. This is going back probably 8 or 9 years ago now, when I was still working in the agency space. And what they were wanting to do is that in the regions where they were represented, one of the challenges they were having is that the retailers that bought their product, they would only buy a select range or a select items from their range. Plus, when it came down to liquidating products, say, for example, at the end of a season, they would have to so radically discount those products to get the resellers and retailers to even buy those products to liquidate through their channels, that they ended up losing money on those products. Now, by having a direct consumer play, they were able to sell their full range of product at all times. They also were able to set up liquidation channels, i.e., they were able to integrate with places like eBay and other marketplaces so that when they had liquidation items, they could sell them at a slight discount, but they didn't have to completely gut the value of the brand by selling at these ridiculous liquidation prices. And so it gave them so much more optionality in the market, and it reduced their total and utter dependence on retailers to sell their product. And so it just gave them so much more flexibility in their go-to-market play, and it allowed them to retain a lot more margin on the products that they ended up selling direct to consumer. So it's not like they stopped selling B2B. It's just that they augmented that with a direct to consumer channel.
Right. And I love that perspective that I didn't see, that they now have like a direct feedback from the consumers, and it's a loop. Like they can use that insights to, developing their products or like what you said, depleting some of the items that are harder to sell in a B2B situation. That's great. I think we're close to wrapping up the episode. What do you think lies ahead, and what trends are you seeing in the B2B commerce space?
Look, I think it's a challenged space, just like direct to consumer or B2C is. I think everybody right now, there's a lot of deer in the headlights in the industry right now, and a lot of people are concerned about interest rates continuing to rise. They're concerned about inflation continuing to rise. We're seeing people being a little bit more risk averse about investments into all channels, not just digital channels, but making any investments into infrastructure, IT, anything that's related to digital. But I think the brands that will end up on the backside of this being the most successful, and look, I'm old enough now, I hate to admit this, but I'm old enough now to have seen a few recessions in my lifetime, and I've seen them in a few different countries now as well. And what I have experienced through this is that the brands that are able to make the smartest and most intentional investments during the downtimes are the ones that will come out the other side much, much further ahead than the brands that do nothing during the downtime and just hope and wait for things to get better. And then they start thinking about investments, because the reality is that when you are talking about implementing, say, a new e-commerce platform, or looking at adding a new digital channel like a marketplace or a social commerce platform, these projects don't happen overnight, especially in B2B business, which is, pardon me, heavily dominated by very complex back office systems, ERPs, WMSs, OMSs, PIM systems. These are complex projects. And so the reality is they don't happen overnight. They take 6, 12, 18 months to, it's a journey, not a destination. So they take 6, 12, 18 months to put a roadmap in place, to roll out these technologies, to integrate them with your other systems. And so, even if you pull the trigger today, it's probably going to be, 6 to 12 months before you have anything meaningful to show from a project that you start kicking off today. And we also have to think about how busy most agencies are that are doing e-commerce development. The reality is they've got to fit you into their production schedule. Nobody likes to launch pre-Christmas. So most people go into code lockdown in October, late October, early November. They don't do any deployments until after Christmas. So you lose 2 to 3 months at the end of the year in project work anyway, and project momentum anyway. And so, my advice to brands is, look, if you've thought about dipping your toes into the e-commerce waters, it's going to take some time. So you should start thinking about it sooner rather than later. And, there is now better technology, more options. It's now more affordable than ever before to get into digital commerce channels. And so these brands really have to start thinking about it.
Yep. I think that's an excellent advice to leave our listeners, whether you're a DTC brand thinking of branching out to e-commerce or vice versa. So definitely start planning or preparing, or, doing the right steps towards expanding to that other channel. Before you wrap up, I'm going to switch gears and follow your format in your podcast, E-commerce Edge, and let you ask me one question, personal or professional.
Yeah. Okay. My question for you is, why is it, do you think, that most B2B marketers in the world have totally focused all of their energy and their experience on B2B SaaS? I don't see too many B2B marketers specializing in B2B commerce marketing. And I think that, along with lots of other deficiencies in the B2B commerce space in terms of capability and experience and skills, there's a massive gap in the marketing space for B2B commerce. There's lots of D2C and B2C marketing specialists, and getting down in even to sub niches of email marketing, performance marketing, organic content, SEO. There seems to be specialists all around the world in B2C, D2C, but hardly any in the B2B commerce space. Why do you think that is?
Right. I totally agree there. And my thinking is because it's easier to roll out or to launch B2B solutions, especially that there are like 10,000 in the current landscape. It's easier to copy. That's what I'm thinking. Like, it's easier to launch, it's easier to copy. And that's why not a lot of people are thinking of, that's why I ask you about this topic, because this is like a totally new concept to me. It's either B2B SaaS or your MarTech and all that tech space, or DTC, direct to consumers. And I think it's easier to see the gaps in that space and to follow the market leaders and the B2B SaaS.
The playbooks, right? There's a lot more playbooks,
yes,
I guess, to follow in the B2C, DTC world than there are in the B2B world. And you have to be a little bit more creative, I think, in the B2B world, and you have to kind of forge your own path, right? But
Right.
I think just to finish things off here, I think that both sides can learn from each other. I think even from a technical perspective, we're bringing a lot of the concepts that were traditionally only B2C, D2C, CDPs, PIMs, marketing automation, when we think of personalization, front-end personalization technologies, those were almost historically exclusively the domain of B2C, D2C websites. That stuff just didn't really exist in the B2B world, but now we're cross-pollinating from one side to the other. I think what B2C, D2C is starting to slowly learn from B2B is the need to actually have real conversations, actual literal conversations with customers. Because historically, B2C, D2C has used ad tech and MarTech to weaponize their marketing and talk at and to their customers, but never actually have a two-way conversation with customers. And I think B2C, D2C is slowly starting to realize that actually picking up the phone and calling customers can have a massive long-term impact in terms of retention and customer joy.
And I still think that B2B has a lot to learn and get inspiration from DTC, although it's like different. You're talking to a different set of audience, but they're still humans at the end of the day. And I would love to see more B2B tech and SaaS treat their customers like how DTC brands are talking to their audience. So I think that's a good place to wrap up. Jason, anything else to promote? Like, let's talk about your mentorship and your podcast, eCommerce Edge.
Yeah, absolutely. My podcast, the eCommerce Edge, is on all podcast engines. So go and check that out wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to join my free mentorship program, I offer both one-to-one and group mentorship for free. And if you go to greenwoodconsulting.net, basically you can go down to the bottom of the page. You can click the Get Mentored by Jason, and it'll take you to the mentorship page. It'll take you to a sign-up form for one-to-one, as well as where you can subscribe to my group mentorship program, which basically is run as a Zoom event, as a recurring Zoom event. So basically, check me out anywhere. And then the third place that people most often find me through is LinkedIn. I put a ton of content on LinkedIn almost every single day. So if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free.
And we will put the links to the description, to the mentorship, to Greenwood Consulting, and to the eCommerce Edge podcast. Thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate learning about B2B commerce and how brands can really learn to expand in that channel. Thank you so much, Jason. And if you found value in this episode, definitely connect with Jason and subscribe to the podcast. I'll see you all next week.